Morning, aspirants. It's 7th of November today, and I welcome you all on today's edition of What to Read in the Hindu newspaper. I'm 𝗗𝗶𝗹𝘆 𝗡𝗏, Senior Mentor at Prepp IAS. While going through the articles, we will not only see its relevance with regard to prelims and mains, but also interlink it with other GS papers as well. I am here to align your newspaper reading as a part of our GS syllabus. So let's get started. The very first article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about Center says right to vote is not same as freedom of voting. Now, when we map this particular article in our syllabus, this will fall under GS paper 2 polity, wherein representation of People's Act 1950 and 1951 can be revised, fundamental rights, electoral reforms. From prelims perspective, the arenas that we have to unfold is about constitutional versus statutory rights, key provisions of RPA, nota and election procedure. Then afterwards, other arenas such as Article 19(1)(e) that talks about freedom of expression in the electoral context as well. Nota and its legal standing, Section 53(2) of RPA Act and 1951 Rule 11 of Conduct of Elections Rule. For mains perspective, we need to know about debate with regard to electoral freedom and democratic expression, whether nota in elections is showing its effective usages or not. And also we get to know about the reforms needed in electoral framework to ensure vibrant democracy in India. This is how this particular article is to be read. The next important article that is there in the paper, just on the same page, that talks about is India to question citizens who worked in Myanmar cybercrime compounds. Now, the key theme that has been discussed in this particular article talks about India's response to transactional cybercrime that involves its citizen in Myanmar's scam hubs. Now, when we map this particular article in our syllabus, this will fall under GS paper 2 IR, India-Myanmar relationship, transnational crime and human trafficking. For paper 3 as well, wherein internal security, cybercrime networks and illegal migrations can be quoted. Other arenas for prelims perspective that we have to keep in mind while going through this particular article, India-Myanmar border geography, right? Then agencies involved in cyber and border management security. Afterwards, International Convention on Cyber Crimes. For mains perspective, the same article is to be seen through the lens of challenges in tackling transnational organized cybercrime, balancing human rights and security in repatriation and questioning, implication for India's neighborhood diplomacy and cyber policy. Right. This is how this particular article is to be seen. The next important article that is there in the paper is on editorials page, and that majorly talks about welfare architecture, wherein UBI, universal basic income, could play a potential role. So this talks about Redraw welfare architecture, place a UBI in the center. The key theme that has been discussed over this particular article is about we need to rethink now India's welfare architecture, wherein we can introduce universal basic income in an era wherein inequality dominates and automation that we are witnessing right now. Relevant for GS paper 2, wherein welfare schemes for vulnerable sections can be linked. Also relevant for GS paper 3, wherein inclusive growth, employment and economic development and digital governance can be quoted. For prelims perspective, we need to have a plethora of knowledge getting to revise from this particular article, wherein primarily the first concept related to what is DBT, Jan Dhan Yojana, Seva pilot project, Gini coefficient index, and its relation with regard to employment and inequality. Reports such as World Inequality Database, World Happiness Reports, McKinsey Automation Report. For mains perspective, we need to revise such as UBI could act as a tool for inclusive growth and economic security. Fiscal viability, which is is it possible or not, and moral arguments for and against both. Then we can even analyze it with regard to targeted subsidies versus universal transfers. In this how this particular article can be read and revised. The next important article is the second issue. A few days back only, I talked about surrogacy law. So in this regard, a recent epic editorial that majorly talks about is the second issue. A more expansive reading of the surrogacy law can be more helpful to couples. So mapping this particular article in our syllabus will fall under GS paper 2, governance, health, right issues, and judiciary and social legislation. Also relevant for GS paper 4, ethics, wherein bioethics, rights, and human dignity can be quoted. The key theme that has been discussed over here is about balancing state regulations and individual reproductive autonomy under Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021. For prelims perspective, we need to revise provisions with regard to surrogacy and act, that is associated reproductive acts, definition of infertility, age and eligibility norms with regard to it. For mains perspective, we need to know the very basic question that we have to ask is about, does restricting surrogacy for second child violates reproductive right under Article 21 or not? Ethical aspects using another woman's body for reproduction, and also judicial interpretation for privacy, autonomy, and medical ethics as well. In this manner, this particular article is to be analyzed. Now, the next important article that is there is about justice in food. So, relevant for GS paper 3, environment, agriculture, food security, and sustainable development. Afterwards, GS paper 2 as well, wherein governance with regard to nutrition policy and SDG goals can be linked. The key theme that has been discussed in this particular article primarily talks about transforming food systems to achieve climate and nutritional justice. For prelims perspective, we need to know Eat Right Movement of India, launched by FSSAI, Lancet Commission, planetary boundaries concept that has been talked about in this particular article, nitrogen phosphorus cycle, agriculture emissions and food systems impact with regard to green gas emissions, then India's diet composition and PDS policy implication altogether. For mains perspective, we can even link it with the need for dietary transition without compromising affordability. Role of policy in balancing environmental sustainability with nutrition security can be quoted. The next important article that is there in the paper, and that talks about why the nomination process needs reform. Relevant for GS paper 2, electoral reforms, RPA Act 1950 and RPA Act 1951, role of election commission. Also relevant for GS paper 4, ethics in governance. Afterwards, this article primarily talks about procedural rigidity and lack of transparency in India's nomination process. It undermines democratic participation. For prelims perspective, we need to revise section 33 to 36 of RPA Act 1951, knowing about article 329B that talks about RO power, that is returning officer's power, concepts of defect of substantial character, recent cases of nomination rejections in such as Surat and Varanasi example. For mains perspective, we can analyze this particular article in a manner. The right to context is twin right to vote. That is the individual who is fighting elections and at the same time the voter who is voting for it. So it's a twin right. Evaluating the need for digital reforms in nomination scrutiny as well. So this particular article talks about this issue, nomination issue in electoral process of India. The last important article for the day is about national policy on sustainable aviation fuel. So India to unveil SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel National Policy, says Mr. Naidu. This is relevant for GS paper 3, environment, energy, infrastructure, science and tech. In this particular section, biofuels could be a subpart to it. Also relevant for GS paper 2, wherein government policies and key initiatives with regard to it can be interlinked. The key theme that has been tried to emphasize in this particular article talks about India's policy push for sustainable aviation fuel as a part of clean energy transition and global climate commitment. For prelims perspective, we need to know about definition and source of sustainable aviation fuel, India's blending target that we have aimed for, global demand trends, and India's biomass potential, right? So also the challenges with regard to it, cost, feedstock, logistics, and R&D issues that would be relevant for our mains perspective. In this manner, this particular article is to be read and revised. This is all from my end for today's paper analysis. Till we meet for the next time, take care and goodbye.